Hello, everyone, and welcome to the third session of the webinar series, Long-Term Energy Scenarios for Developing National Energy Transition Plans in Africa. My name is Nadim Gusous. I'm a member of the Energy Planning Support Team at IRENA, and I have the pleasure to introduce today's session and participants. The LTES Africa webinar series is organized as an activity under the framework of IRENA's LTES Network, a network of energy scenario practitioners in the government sector. Over the next sessions, we will feature selected African countries and institutions that will share their good scenario planning practices for setting long-term policy, particularly in the context of the clean energy transition. This webinar series is organized in partnership with the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, Get Transform, the African Union Commission, African Union Development Agency, the African Development Bank, and the Ministry of Energy of Kenya. Partner organizations will take turns to moderate sessions in the coming days and will also give short presentations on their activities in support of the effective use and development of LTES, or long-term energy scenarios, in Africa. Today's agenda is the following. We have a slightly shorter session today. First, I will quickly introduce the LTES network, its activities, and its objectives. I will then turn it over to the moderator of today's session, Dr. Linus Mofor, Senior Environmental Affairs Officer at the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa. Following that, we will hear a presentation from the Energy Commission of Nigeria, followed by a 20-minute discussion. We will then hear a short presentation by UNECA on their activities supporting energy planning in the region. During the question and answer session, we will try to address some of the questions from the audience. So please use the Q&A function to direct your questions to the speakers. You can find it at the bottom of the screen. There's also English to French simultaneous interpretation that can be accessed using the interpretation button at the bottom of the screen. Also, the slides and recordings will be made available on the IRENA event webpage, and we will share this link in the chat. So before we begin, I would like to say a few words about the LTES network. It is a network of energy scenario practitioners in the government sector, and it's a global platform for government planners to exchange knowledge and good practices in the use and development of model-based long-term energy scenarios to guide the clean energy transition. We also engage other scenario experts in technical institutions to keep our government planning community updated with the most recent trends in the scenario field. The network emerged from the LTES campaign that started in 2018, a campaign that IRENA served as an operating agent under the Clean Energy Ministerial, which has now become the LTES initiative. We currently have 25 member countries and, as of today, 12 technical institutions. LTES member countries are those who have already a good scenario planning practices established, so that the discussion can focus on not just scenario-based planning, but more on peer-to-peer learning on the use of scenarios in the context of the energy transition. So just a few words on LTES, or long-term energy scenarios. So LTES are a fundamental tool for energy policymaking. With a changing energy landscape, global agreements for decarbonization and innovations in the sector, the evolution of the energy system is uncertain. And using long-term scenarios has become essential to support decision-making for government planning. In that context, I would like to just describe the mental model we operate with here at the LTES network. So here we focus on LTES used in the long-term planning processes of the government sector. Energy modeling tools here are often used as inputs to formulate long-term scenarios. As an output of LTES, governments also develop policy documents such as master plans and roadmaps strategies and use them to guide policy. Along these processes, stakeholder consultations also take place. The network's activities focus on long-term energy scenarios and the process itself and the institutional framework, but not necessarily, for example, on the energy modeling tools or the policy outcomes. So with this model in mind, I would just like to talk about the focus of this activity and the network. We have three main components. The first pillar is about how governments are developing scenarios, particularly in the context of developing scenarios to better reflect potential transformative changes The second pillar is about how governments are using scenarios to guide the clean energy transition. And the last pillar is about different approaches on building scenario planning capacity within the government sector. With that, I would like to introduce today's moderator, Linus Mofor. Linus is a senior environmental affairs officer at the Energy, Infrastructure and Climate Change at the African Climate Policy Center of the UN Economic Commission for Africa. His work entails leading the program of analytical and research work related to climate change, energy, and resilient infrastructure in support of low carbon development in Africa, supporting institutional and human capacity strengthening on energy planning, and building partnerships to promote best practice for policy and regulatory frameworks. Before joining ECA, Linus was a renewable energy innovation and technology analyst with IRENA. So Linus, please, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nadim, for this. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, wherever you are globally. And welcome again once more to this long-term energy scenarios webinar, the session 3 of this series. We are very pleased and honored to have with us for this session 3, a very eminent speaker in the name of Professor Eli Idere Bala, who is the head of the Energy Commission of Nigeria. Professor Bala is a graduate of mechanical engineering and has a doctorate degree in applied energy from the Cranfield Institute in the UK. He's the director and chief executive officer, as I said, of the Energy Commission of Nigeria, a very strategic energy planning agency of the government. Nigeria is very important for the continent, being the largest economy, of course, but extremely important in terms of energy development on the continent. He has written many papers and articles published in very reputable international and local and academic journals, conference proceedings, technical reports, and so on. So, ladies and gentlemen, you agree with me that we are very pleased, we are very fortunate to have such an eminent speaker for this session 3 and for the powerhouse of Africa, which is Nigeria. Professor Bala, I hand over the floor to you to make your interventions, and then following that, we'll have some questions and answers from colleagues who are all online and listening to you. Professor Obala, over to you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We're indeed happy to be a part of these discussions and to share our own experience here in Nigeria. I want to thank you, Nadim, and Linus Mofo, and Arena in general for this opportunity. Indeed, our long-term energy scenarios for developing energy transition plans are carried out, yes, by the Commission, are carried out by Energy Commission of Nigeria by law, because the role of the Commission is to produce strategic plans and coordinate national policies in the field of energy in all its ramifications. In doing so, we produce periodic energy master plans for the balanced and coordinated development of energy in Nigeria. Next slide, please. Now, this is the outline as provided for by Arena to present the development of scenarios, use of scenarios, and then the scenario capacity building. Next slide. Next slide. Well, the governance under the development of scenarios, the energy planning is part of national planning under the Federal Ministry of Finance, Budget and National Planning. So we have this, the Ministry of Finance, Budget and National Planning that does overall national economic planning, development planning, and energy is part of it and is carried along. And once we do the planning, the Ministry of Finance, Budget and National Planning takes it over. Now, ECN, in collaboration with relevant MDAs, because relevant MDAs, organized private sector, and civil society organizations do form what is known as the National Steering Committee. A National Steering Committee made up of members from the MDAs, particularly Ministry of Petroleum, Ministry of Power, Ministry of Environment, and Ministry of Mines and Steel Development. These are the major ministries that are involved in the planning, headed by ministers. Then we invite people from the organized private sector. Now, the plans will include subsectoral plans, because the ministries' departments will come with their own subsectoral plans, which are now incorporated into the overall national planning. The technical committee, apart from the National Steering Committee, we have the technical committee, and the technical committee is really resides in the commission, resides in the Energy Commission of Nigeria. And the technical committee are officers that have expertise in energy planning models. Those who are versed in some models like MAIDS, like message, WAPS, and of recent, the calculator, the 2050 calculator. And in doing so, we consider factors such as the economy, demography, industrial development path, and environmental policy. Indeed, because of climate challenges, climate concerns, our environmental policy is seriously taken into consideration during the long-term scenario planning. Now, the Technical Implementation Committee presents results to the National Steering Committee, which now therefore goes to the Federal Executive Council. Federal Executive Council is a body of ministers chaired by the president of the country. And once those plans are approved, then it becomes a national document. Indeed, we have had rolling plans. Indeed, we have had rolling plans, but this got distorted over years. Next plan, and next slide. Now, the boundary of the planning scenarios really, just like I said, are within the economic policies of government and the environmental policies. It's at the basic boundary conditions. Economic policies, governments will want economy growing single digit, double digits, and then the environmental policies, emissions must be kept within a certain limit, and etc. and etc. So these scenarios are within these boundary conditions. But most importantly is that the data used, particularly in setting up baseline or reference year scenarios, a lot of data is needed, is collected, and these MDAs and the organized private sector, who are members of the National Steering Committee, assist in getting data that will form the baseline or reference scenario. Next slide. So for the purpose of the use of the scenario building, have focus for the focus are used for infrastructural development. For instance, our energy demand and supply projections have been used in producing the National Integrated Master Plan, long-term National Integrated Master Plan up to 2030. We're now developing one between 2020 to 2050, referred to as the Nigeria Agenda 2050. They are also using exploiting alternatives. Scenario building is used in exploiting alternatives, particularly the 2050 calculator has been found very, very useful and in exploiting alternatives. We use this, what are the emissions, what are the costs. And it's also used to raise target ambitions. Of course, with ambitious targets, it makes us innovative. For instance, we have a lot of electricity deficit in this country, but our targets are pushing what the private sector, particularly after the reforms, pushing the private sector to ensure that capacities are really on ground. The other thing is that used to drive innovations, which I had mentioned, because targets enable innovations to come up. If your generation capacity is 30, but the target is about 100, certainly there is a gap which needs to be filled. This drives innovations. Innovation, both in terms of investments, in terms of technology. Now, the communication of scenario results are usually done through publications. After the approval by the Federal Executive Council, even the drafts are published and put on websites, and the publications can be accessed. We also have workshops and seminars where stakeholders come together to be presented and awareness created on the scenarios created. Next slide. If there is any. Well, the planning capacity in government is mainly in-house. It is located in the Commission, Energy Commission of Nigeria. And however, the capacity has been built from outside. For instance, the use of IEA modeling tools where capacity was built from IEA. The 2050 calculator was from collaboration with the Department of Business, Energy and Industrial, used to be DEC, Energy and Climate Change of the UK, in collaboration with the British High Commission. And we are now incorporating our universities and research institutes, because when we're holding seminars and workshops, we invite to universities. They are also encouraged to assess our publications, and so that they can even start planning, particularly for the case of universities. They can start planning. They can start planning for the universities, because university is one of the load centers in terms of energy utilization, and it's a system that grows. Particularly for new universities, we encourage them to have energy planning for their universities, taking care of incorporating the academic planning, physical planning, because academic planning, expansion of academic activities are energy consuming, physical infrastructure too are energy consuming. So we encourage them to establish energy planning units in the universities. The models are, of course, made available to research institutes, officers that are keen and ready to work on energy planning tools. Next slide. Well, that's the end, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Bala, for sharing with us the long-term energy scenario process for Nigeria, and speaking to the framework that Nadim presented to us at the beginning, where you elaborated the stakeholder engagement. We talked about your energy, the 2050 calculator, which I presume is what you use for your energy modeling and calculations, and then that fit to the scenarios within the boundary conditions that you have mentioned, and then hope that goes to influence the Nigerian energy policy and that the energy policy for the transition then influence the investments that happen. So thank you for sharing those thoughts with us. But I was wondering, Professor, whether you can give us some concrete examples of the calculations that were done with the calculator, and then the scenarios that you looked at with the stakeholder engagement that you mentioned, and then which policies Nigeria is now having, and how those policies so far are influencing the investments that Nigeria needs for the energy transition.
Well, for the 2050 calculator, the 2050 calculator really assisted us in determining our national determined contributions, right during COP21 and even now COP26. And we also had support from organizations like ARENA and the EU. The scenario setting was actually done from the point of view of using the resources that we have, particularly renewable resources. We have the sun, we have hydro, we have biomass, and wind. So we set this scenario based on perhaps percentages. If our electricity supply is to be so percentage hydro, mixed with gas or mixed with sand, what effect is going to cause on emissions and the demand, and as well as cost. And with the 2050 calculator is interactive, you can see it. And it's very easy for the policymakers to appreciate the pathways you want to take in meeting the energy demand. But the other ones we had much earlier was the model for analysis of energy demand, which is an IEA model, really based on demography, based on economic scenarios, GDP growth rates, look at the economy, structure of the economy, and see how particularly want to industrialize, what percentage manufacturing or be contributing to the GDP. So you break the GDP into sectors, economic sectors, because it's believed that energy demand is driven by economic activities. And with that, Nigeria, we've had policymakers had consistently wanted GDP growth rates of about 7%. Of course, we are now growing at a much slower pace, 3%, because of COVID and the impact on the economy. But the politicians want an average growth rate of about 7%. And indeed, some want double digits. So we produce energy demand scenarios based on 7% and double digits up to 2030. Electricity, for instance, by now we should have had an installed capacity of about 45 gigawatts. However, we're just at 30 gigawatts. So there is a gap. And I think that is driving, it gives a room to private sector so that there is a room for investment. There's a room for investment. If we are planning 45 by now, and then we just have 30 gigawatts. So certainly there's a room for investment. And indeed, by 2030, may need nothing less than 100,000 gigawatts, nothing less than 100,000. So there's really room for investment. And the government is working very hard based on that influence, the investment climate in the country. And a lot of things are being done to ensure that the investment climate is friendly and attracts foreign direct investment.
No, that's great. No, that's great, Professor. Thank you very much. There are quite a number of questions in the Q&A for you, Professor. You actually elaborated about the governance structure, which is critical in this framework of the long-term energy scenarios. That was very well elaborated, where you showed the steering committee and then the technical committee and how the different ministries are working, and then how the commission is situated in Ministry of Finance. And I think this is very important. And you mentioned about how the NDCs are critical in your LTES. And so talking about the NDCs, is the commission actually responsible for the implementation? Because we know, at least those are related to energy, because we know that in the early stages, when we were doing intended nationally determined contributions, it was the ministries of environment that were in concern. Then they signed the Paris Agreement, ratified, and then it goes to implementation. Then implementation is in the Ministry of Finance because you need the money, but Ministry of Finance across the whole of government. So we just wanted to ask, what role is the Energy Commission of Nigeria playing in terms of the implementation of the NDCs, at least as far as it concerns energy-related actions?
Well, yes, you are right. The Ministry of Environment is the national focal point on environmental issues. And so climate change, they are the national focal point. But of course, they also have stakeholders. So the Energy Commission is one. So in developing this, our responsibility really is to ensure energy security in the country. But you can't have energy security, developing these scenarios for energy security, you must take care of environmental concerns.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the environment needed the NDCs, needed the national determined contribution, of which energy has an input.
Mm-hmm.
So ours is to make an input into them, but the implementation of the NDCs is really the responsibility of the Federal Ministry of Environment.
Okay. Thank you, Professor. And you made a very important point that your scenario is driven by two boundary conditions. The first one being the economic growth agenda, and then the environmental policy, which is very important, as you have elaborated. So somebody was asking in the Q&A if how do you engage other stakeholders in the context, at least, of those boundary conditions in developing these scenarios?
Well, just like I said, we usually have stakeholder engagements. They are invited and they present, that is the inputs, various departments like the electricity, Ministry of Power does the presentations and bring our input, Ministry of Petroleum, and Ministry of Environment come with their own conditions. So these are all put together, and a consensus is reached on the on the pathway to tech. It's evolved through consensus, really. Evolves through consensus, and all these MDAs, organized private sector, come together. For instance, yesterday we had just a stakeholder meeting. Yesterday we had a stakeholder meeting in order to review the national energy policy. And of course, the national energy policy has environmental policy inside. The Ministry of Environment, particularly climate change department, were there. And everybody is carried along. I could see, I can read some questions here. ECN is under the Ministry of Finance, Budget and National Planning. How is it coordinated with our ministries related to energy? Now, Energy Commission, Ministry of Finance, Budget and National Planning is a member of the commission. Energy Commission is made up of Ministry of Finance, Ministers of Finance, Budget and National Planning, Minister of Petroleum, Minister of Power, Minister of Agriculture and Rural Development, because of biomass, Ministry of and Biofuels, Ministry of Water Resources, because of hydropower, Minister of Science and Technology, because of research and development in the energy sector, and Minister of Defense. So Minister of Finance is part and parcel of Energy Commission.
Okay. No, that's
and with the President as the chairman, President and the Commander-in-Chief is the chairman.
No, that
so
is,
it's a very heavy commission.
Yeah, and putting it out there shows the importance that the country is placing on that process and on that agenda. But you know, Professor, one of the three pillars of the long-term energy scenarios program is capacity. And of course, you know, we have a big commission, but we know that in many African countries, in fact, in many developing countries, the human capacity to do the technical work that is needed to go into this is a bit of a challenge. And there's a lot of demand on people's time and so on. How is the capacity situation with the Energy Commission of Nigeria? Are you having enough capacity, or are people coming and then the turnover is high, or you have a very big base of capacity that can enable the commission to do its work?
Well, planning, the use of energy planning tools actually started in the year 2000. Started in the year 2000, so just about 2 decades ago. And we were introduced by the International Atomic Energy Agency, Energy Planning Department. They came and started and then trained, that is, came and trained the critical mass, initial critical mass. Just like you said, unfortunately, that critical mass is no longer there. They have gone. Some have retired. But the first capacity also did train other younger ones. And subsequently also we've had programs from the IAEA, either as an African program or as a sub-regional program, where they come and train officers, particularly on made and message models. I think it was in 2000 that they came last, and membership participants came from Ghana, from the West African sub-region. But certainly the capacity is inadequate. Capacity is inadequate. More capacity building is required. And as people age and leave the service, younger ones need to be trained.
Yeah, indeed, Professor, and linked to this issue of capacity is the fact that, again, in many developing countries, with the development cooperation that different development partners provide to support countries, there is a tendency now to use external consultants who come in, do some work and go. But we're trying to rectify this, the different partners, and see how we can, because some consultants go and they go with the data, or they go with some of the things that they've done, and then we're back to square one again in most cases. So I'm just wondering if also, notwithstanding the constraints of the fact that you're still building enough capacity in the commission, whether this is a challenge for you, and if so, what you are doing to deal with it.
Well, yes, you're right. We have development partners that come and do some work for us. Unfortunately, we feel that the local capacity is the best and the most sustainable, because consultants come, just like you said, collect data, go with it. Even some of the processes, how they went about bringing out some of these things, are not made available. So we feel that the best is to have our own indigenous capacity. And we always encourage that even if a consultant comes in, you must work with indigenous officers, so that by the time they go, there will be a takeaway. There will be a takeaway, and we insist on that.
No, that's good. That's good, Professor. And I think in the next segment, when my colleague presents, we'll also hear some of that we're trying to do to contribute in that area. But we have a question for you, Professor, from Mr. Adedeji, who is saying that given the amount of resources that you've mentioned that Nigeria has, how comes that Nigeria is still struggling with electrification? We know the problems. What is the solution and the action plan? Can you please walk us through the agendas and not the figure alone? So this is a question from Mr. Adedeji.
Well, the issue of implementation, I mean, it's a question that comes on every time you have a discussions about the Nigerian energy scenario. We have the huge resources. We have huge resources. We have huge crude oil, but yet we import petroleum products. Our refineries capacity utilizations are very low. We have gas, and yet we don't have sufficient generation capacity. We have the sun, and yet we don't have enough, well, the sun, the hydro, the renewables, just like any other African country. Yes, the issue of implementation is a big challenge. And I think government is working very hard. As you are aware, this government has been fighting corruption, have been improving on the environment to attract investors. Well, we have security challenges here and there, but I think these are issues that are also being resolved. But really, the issue of leakages are being fought by this government. And implementation, when you minimize the leakages, just like any other processes, either in carrying electricity, once you minimize the losses, you have a very good system. Same thing with implementation of programs. Yes, we have very nice policies and plans and master plans on ground. Implementation has always been our challenge, and we're working on that. And I think the basic thing is to ensure that things are done correctly. There's no impunity, rule of law, and I think at the end of the day, we will come out of this implementation challenge.
Okay. No, thank you, Professor. You mentioned about gas, and this is very interesting because I know we've had some conversations with Vice President Osibanjo. I know Nigeria and many other African and indeed other developing countries are giving a pushback against the use of gas as a transition fuel for the energy transition. So I was just wondering how this is gas is playing in the long-term energy scenario of Nigeria.
Yes, I think that is you are right. Our government, particularly in the recently passed Petroleum Industry Act, gas is going to serve as our energy transition fuel, since it has the lowest carbon emissions. But then, just like our government is pushing for equity, pushing for fairness in the transition. Of course, poverty in Africa and Nigeria also is high, and countries like ours that depend on petroleum, certainly there must be equity. Certainly there must be equity in the transition. There must be equity in the transition, and gas will serve as the transition fuel. And I always want to also add that biofuels, our emphasis also must be laid on biofuels. Biofuels as transition fuel, as transition fuel too, that is environmentally friendly, and it's also environmentally friendly, carbon neutral, creates a lot of employment because we have a very high unemployment rate. It's because it links agriculture and energy. Agriculture is a very it employs a lot of labor. Okay. So I always like to bring in biofuels as a substitute for during the transition and thereafter. Yes, we have huge amount of gas, over 203 trillion standard cubic feet. So I think if we commercialize that, have gas pipelines that are coming up now from the gas fields to in-country, so that it will boost industrialization, power generation, and economic activities, and certainly will hit the 7% GDP growth rate very soon.
Okay. No, thank you, Professor. And our time is coming up now. You mentioned about poverty, and I think this is what we know in Africa, rural electrification is a big challenge. So maybe if in your closing question, there are so many questions that we have not been able to go through, but I want to pick this one on about how rural electrification plays a part in the LTES in Nigeria. And then also that you mentioned that the Energy Commission and the plan is by law, and so it has to be updated. When is it mandated? By the time which you have to updated? And if so, when is going to be the next date? So if Professor, we can finish your interventions with those two questions, then I will hand back over to our colleagues in IRENA. Thank you.
Certainly plans are not static. Plans are reviewed regularly. The long-term plans are 30 to 35 years, but you review them after every five years or so. Yes, Rural Electrification Agency has a very great role to play, and it's playing it. It's enhancing access to electricity, particularly using renewables, and in particular, solar PV technology. They are expanding access through installations of solar PV mini grids, off grids that are private sector driven. And I think it has a very big role to play in the long term transitioning from high carbon to low carbon electricity supply.
Thank you very much, Professor Bala, for sharing Nigeria's experiences with the long-term energy scenarios with us. This is very much appreciated, and I really want to thank you and give you a digital applause, so to speak, and I invite my colleagues to thank you very much for that. And I would like now to hand over to Nadim and in Irina. Nadim, over to you. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you. You're welcome. You're welcome, Mofo.
Thank you very much, Linus. And thank you, Professor Bala, as well, for a very insightful presentation and discussion. We really learned a lot from this session. So we hope we can hear from you again as well in our upcoming activities. So thank you. So,
thank you.
So in the interest of time now, I'll just transition to our next part. So now we have a short presentation by a colleague of Linus, actually, Mikalia Paulos. So Mikalia is a research officer in sustainable energy and climate change at the African Climate Policy Center of the UN Economic Commission for Africa. Her work focuses on socioeconomic development, climate action, sustainable energy, and low carbon development pathways, particularly within the ongoing global energy systems transformation and primarily in the African region. She is one of the future energy leaders of the World Energy Council, where she contributes to publications on energy security, energy access, and climate action. So thank you, Mikalia, and please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Nadim, and a very good morning or good afternoon, as the case may be, to you all. Am I audible?
Yes, all good.
Okay, great. Thank you again. It's a pleasure to be with you all and be part of this event. So I'm going to be speaking about the Energy Modeling Platform for Africa, which is a fairly new initiative, a new capacity building initiative of the UNECA and the wider Optimus community. It's aimed at creating the critical mass of energy planning experts in African countries to support optimized investments in energy production and services, so as to meet the continent's growing demand for sustainable, inclusive, and climate resilient development pathways, capitalizing on its abundant energy resources. The idea for an energy modeling platform arose prior to COP21, driven by the deficit of capacity generally for energy modeling in Africa. We felt it was crucial to provide those working in the energy sphere with a better understanding of the energy landscape and how in particular the use of open source modeling and planning tools could help in addressing Africa's energy challenges. As Africa strives to meet the considerable energy requirements of its rising population, attain the SDGs, as well as meet its industrialization imperatives enshrined in Agenda 2063, the urgent need for strategic long-term energy planning cannot be more essential. Moreover, the recent launch of the African Climate Trade Policy Free Trade Agreement, the AfCFTA, earlier this year will only shift its energy demand into higher gear. Further, as climate action continues to gain even more credence amid the ongoing energy transition and growing calls for Africa to define net zero emission targets, this only lends weight to the need for closing the deficit in human institutional capacity regarding effectively using models and modeling tools for energy supply, demand, investment planning, and management. Indeed, energy planning and investment choices made today will determine development pathways for the next 30, 40 years. And African countries are looking to strategically fashion their energy mix going forward without locking themselves into certain technologies that will not perform, or end up investing in technologies that may be hard to finance, while concomitantly seizing the opportunities that clean energy technologies offer. And with every challenge, there comes an opportunity which can be leveraged. Hence, such pivotal decisions ought to be taken prudently and crucially done so with a long-term vision. The lack of long-term energy planning in general is often cited as one of the primary deterrents to energy investments on the continent. Hence, the AMPA, Energy Modeling Platform for Africa, aspires to bridge the gap between Africa's energy modeling needs and energy policy realities by harnessing open source tools and data to support African energy analysts, researchers, and by extension governments as they analyze policies and challenges specific to their respective countries in such a way as to ensure their energy resources meet national imperatives. And this is key, as of course, local ownership of the process is essential. Pardon me. 2 rounds of the AMPA have taken place to date, namely AMPA 2018, which started the process in Addis Ababa, and AMPA 2019 at the University of Cape Town in South Africa. Since its humble beginnings with only 30 participants, we have been encouraged by and witnessed growing interest and participation and resounding calls for more dedicated sessions. Owing to the COVID-19 pandemic, AMPA 2020 had to be postponed to the current year, and as such, AMPA 2021 is now taking place completely virtually. This actually began last month with over 100 participants, and the open source modeling tools have been taken up at an impressive scale, more so than in other regions. We have sister AMPAs taking place in Europe and Latin America, so we've been glad to be part of this growing community. So more specifically, the AMPA is an avenue for acquiring free training, and we'd like to focus on the free part. It's absolutely free. Access to discussion forums and coaching skills and energy planning models and tools. Although the AMPA acknowledges that different countries and regions within Africa will require context-specific approaches, the overarching objectives of the platform are to A, gather the energy planning and modeling community in Africa to share experiences, models, and data in climate, land, energy, and water systems. B, support policy coherence through human and institutional coordination and capacity in Africa for integrated energy modeling and investment planning. Support the development of centers of excellence for energy planning in Africa. And finally, promote efficient and widespread use of open source modeling tools to support, of course, the implementation of SDGs, the Paris Agreement, and Africa's Agenda 2063. This year in 2021, the course offerings have been expanded with 5 tracks. The first one is called Onset, which looks at geospatial dimensions in energy modeling. And then there's one called Osmosis and Flextral, which hones in on investments when and at what scale are needed in the energy sector, as well as modeling the flexibility of the electricity system to account for higher penetration of renewables. There's also FinPlan, which looks at kind of the financing, how that's done in power sector across the world with primary focus on developing countries. There's Need and Energy Balance Studio, which the distinguished gentleman from Nigeria mentioned earlier, dealing with energy balances and energy systems in general, assisting them in energy system planning. And finally, we have Clues, which shows important interlinkages between resource systems such as land, energy, water, and climate systems. This all culminates in a high-level strategic dialogue of government officials, representatives of international organizations, as well as the expert community on planning and policies for national sustainable development for the 2030 agenda. So that the participants are also given the opportunity to showcase their work. As a final note, in the interest of time, crucially, the AMPA is a collaboration of a myriad of institutions, primarily, of course, led by the African Common Policy Center, where Linus and I work at the ECA, but also including the World Bank, UNDESA, GIZ, IRENA, IAEA, as well as more academic institutions such as the University of Cambridge, Oxford, Loughborough University, as well as other parts of the Climate Compatible Growth Program of the UK, because we truly believe the need for effective partnership and synergizing efforts with like-minded institutions, drawing on the expertise of both academia and international organizations. The different tracks are led by IAEA, IRENA, World Bank, depending on the different specializations. So really is a kind of holistic effort. And notably, the EMP is co-organized with an African academic institution. This is really key because we're really looking towards building up centers of excellence and hubs within Africa as they arise, and making that crucial link between academia and government ministries to eventually reach that critical mass of policymakers and technical experts of energy modeling and planning to support the continent. We believe it's vital to cast a wider net, so to speak, in this respect. So far we've co-hosted with the Addis Ababa University, there's the University of Cape Town, and currently we're co-hosting the latest EMP with the University of Mauritius, which actually has been publishing papers and undertaking commendable work in this sphere. So again, to do away with that kind of siloed approach and work together to synergize our efforts. as we are all really working towards the overarching goal of attaining inclusive and climate resilient development pathways. So I will leave it at that for now in the interest of time. Many thanks for your attention, and over to you, Nadeem.
Thank you, Mikhail. That was very interesting to hear. I mean, the EMPA is a really ambitious initiative, and it's really good to hear about it. So I just wanted to maybe ask you a couple of questions. As you said, in the interest of time, we don't have much left, so I'll make them quick on my side. So you mentioned you started in 2018. I was wondering, what changes have you seen, or what have you learned in this current ongoing version of EMPA, especially relative to the past one? Have you seen anything, any developments in particular, for example, or so? Yeah, I mean, your insights basically on what's happening at the moment.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. Well, again, as I said, one thing that we have really seen is there's growing, I mean, the whole point of coming up with EMPA was to meet the deficit in human institutional capacity building. And we have seen a lot of interest. We only started with about 25 or just under 30 participants, but there have been growing calls. I think about 200 people applied for the latest iteration. And there's been, we feel that there's been an interest and kind of resounding calls for more of this. We were unable to meet the capacity in terms of the need, but we're doing our best in partnering with more organizations to be able to meet that need. And also we've seen more publications that are coming out. People are feeling more confident using these tools and using them to come up. You know, remember that framework that you showed at the beginning, the tools lead into LTES scenarios and energy planning. So we believe that there has been an increase in the capacity to meet that need. But again, it's very, it's a very new initiative. And we're hoping that, you know, we will build on this and kind of expand. The tracks, for example, we initially just started with onset and osmosis, but now it's expanding into FlexTool, FinPlan, the IA is involved with need, etc. So even within CLUES, there's been an expansion in the need and more countries kind of asking for more of those tools and that capacity building. So we're hopeful that going forward, you know, this will actually help with building in that long-term energy planning need that, of course, is required within the African continent.
Thank you. And we have a couple of questions we received in the Q&A. Is the EMPA targeted only for academia, and who can join the training? And maybe on the same subject as well, what is the timeline for the EMPA?
Oh, yes. Actually, I mentioned that earlier. I was probably talking too fast and I wasn't very clear. So no, we actually cast a wider net. Academia, of course, is important, but we try to have researchers or international organizations. There are other people that are involved. It's not only academia. We really do, because this was mentioned before as well, it's a multi-stakeholder effort. So the energy planning capacity building expands wider than just looking specifically at academia, although it kind of started in that respect. So no, for this year, unfortunately, this is the second last week of the EMPA 2021. So by Monday or Tuesday, I believe participants are going to be working on their presentations, and the high level is actually taking place on Thursday. So Thursday next week. So EMPA 2021 is pretty much drawing to a close, but we are definitely going to have, because the plan is to have one every year. COVID-19 kind of put a dent in our efforts for last year, but we are going to, hopefully, if everything goes according to plan, going to have an EMPA 2022. So usually it happens towards the end of the year, and we send out, you know, we advertise it on our website at ECA, on the Optimus EMPA website itself, as well as sending it out to our networks. For those that are interested, I mean, I could definitely give my contact details, and they could contact us. But the next one will probably take place towards the end of 2022. So there is indeed some time. But yes, please feel free to contact me. Because we're trying to expand this as much as possible so that people can really harness the opportunity. And yeah, so please, yes, do contact us.
You know, good to hear about the upcoming one as well. Just a final question then. And so how do you consider the support to government institutions that, or other stakeholders that use tools other than the ones you mentioned before? Is that included in a way, or how do you reach out to those institutions?
Sorry, Nadeem, I lost you there for a minute. I think it was breaking up. Can you please repeat that question? So sorry about that.
No, no worries. So how do you consider the support to government institutions that use other tools than the ones you've mentioned that you're using in the EMPA? So other modeling tools, for example.
Oh, well, again, this is kind of like our major focus right now as an initiative, but of course we do intend to, a lot of our support that we give is demand-led. So when we get that demand and when we get that request, we try to, of course, try to meet it in-house if possible, branch out to our other partners to see if others can meet it. But indeed, yes, EMP is kind of like our focus right now, but of course it's not the only one. Our support is completely demand-led. So depending on what our member states ask of us, we do try to meet that need.
Sure. Thank you. Yeah, that's very good to hear as well, and I think useful to our attendees. So I think that's it for time. So thank you again for joining and presenting today, Mikalia. And with that, I'd like to also conclude this session. So I would like to conclude today's session with the announcement of the next session. The next session is scheduled for next Wednesday, and it was actually due to be part of the 7th Program for Infrastructure Development in Africa, the PIDA week. But due to the postponement of the event, it will now be done separately and will feature regional power pools and economic community representatives. The full details will be shared in the lead up to the session, so please keep an eye out for that. So today was the 3rd session of this webinar series. If any of the audience have any feedback on the way forward, you can please write to us at ltes@irena.org. It's in the chat at the moment. We will play now a 1-minute video on the LTES network, and we will close with that. So thank you once again to Linus, to Mikalia, to Professor Bala as well. It was a pleasure, and I hope to see you all in the next session. Thank you.
The world of energy is changing. The energy system of the future will be based on sustainable, renewable energy. Innovation and digitalization are changing the way we consume energy. How can decision makers in governments and businesses prepare for the energy transition? Long-term energy scenarios, LTES, can help plan for a low-carbon future by identifying opportunities, potential risks, and cost-effective near-term solutions. IRENA actively supports energy planners through its global LTES network. Governments can share their experience, exchange best practices, and explore the most pressing future trends together with global experts. Government institutions and supporting technical agencies can become members of the LTES network. Join us. Contact LTES at irena.org for more information.